An independent autopsy on Nolan Wells just came back, and the very first line of that report isn't about how he died. It's about something that was supposed to be there and wasn't. 6 weeks after his family refused to accept the explanation they were first given, this is where it's led. Cause and manner of death, undetermined. An unexplained mark still unaccounted for. A gap in the evidence nobody's fully explained.
Preliminary findings, and this is significant. Focal area of red discoloration in the soft tissue of the back of the head, the occipital region. He said the etiology is unknown at this time. He said the body was received after the initial autopsy. He said the body had marked decompensation. He said coronal incision of the scalp, brain removal, Y-shaped incision of the anterior torso, and he talked about the organs being removed, as is common, accompanied in the body cavity. And that when you have an autopsy, the organs are removed from the body and they are dissected and examined, and then they are put back in a bag within inside the body.
In this true crime documentary, we're walking through exactly what that independent report found, and just as important, what it still can't tell us. This is a real, ongoing case. Everything here sticks strictly to what's actually been confirmed. Nothing embellished, nothing dramatized. If you're watching tonight, drop the city or state you're tuning in from in the comments. This one's reached people coast to coast. And if you want to be here the second the next update on this case drops, go ahead and subscribe right now. To understand why that missing evidence hit so hard, we have to rewind to where this all began. Nolan went out on the water on July 4th with a group of friends. He didn't leave the island with the rest of the group, and his phone never made it back either. The story afterward was that he'd decided to hang back on the island a while longer before making his own way home. 2 days later, on July 6th, a park ranger patrolling the shoreline spotted something in the water. It was Nolan. Jackson County Sheriff John Ledbetter addressed the public that same day, and his read on what happened came fast. Faster, in hindsight, than the investigation itself. He called it an accident. No red flags, nothing pointing anywhere else. Toxicology hadn't come back yet. A real timeline hadn't even been pieced together. For Christine and Elmore, Nolan's parents, that wasn't the comfort it might have been intended as. It read instead like the case was already being closed out, like nobody planned to keep asking questions. So 6 days after losing their son, while they were still arranging his funeral, Christine and Elmore made a call that changed everything. Before Nolan was laid to rest, they brought in their own pathologist for a second look. That pathologist was Dr. Roger Mitchell, board certified, with 2 decades in forensic pathology and a past chief medical examiner in a major U.S. city. He'd never set foot in Mississippi before this case, and didn't know anyone connected to it, which meant he had no reason to shade his findings one way or the other. This wasn't about taking sides, not the family's version, not the sheriff's. Mitchell's only mandate was to read what the evidence actually said. What he came back with didn't give the family peace. It gave them a whole new set of questions. Right out of the gate, before Mitchell had even started his own exam, something was already missing. Material that should have come with Nolan's case wasn't there. It had never arrived. It turned out the state had kept that material after their own initial autopsy, done before Nolan's body ever made it back to his family for burial. To be fair, Mitchell didn't treat this as automatically suspicious. He's seen it plenty of times before. Examiners often hang on to material like this while they finish their own work on a case. Problem is, a good explanation doesn't put the missing piece back on the table. Whatever that material could have shown, Mitchell couldn't get to it. Not because he lacked the skill to find answers, but because there was nothing left to work with. For a family already pushing for basic information, that gap felt less like bad luck and more like being shut out of their own son's case from step one. That gap set the tone for everything that followed. Mitchell's official ruling. Cause and manner of death. Undetermined, pending further investigation. That word carries more weight than it might seem at first. It's not the same as saying nothing happened, and it's not the same as saying the case is dead. It just means investigators don't have enough yet to say for sure what Nolan went through before he ended up in the water. Remember, the sheriff went with accident inside that first hour after Nolan turned up. Undetermined was the first time anyone in an official capacity admitted the early version of events wasn't the full picture. The second finding was physical. Mitchell found something on the back of Nolan's head. A mark with nothing underneath it to suggest a fracture and no clear story behind it. It didn't fit neatly into accident. It didn't fit neatly into anything else either. It was just there, unexplained. Notice what Mitchell didn't say. He never used the word harm. He never called it proof of foul play. The only claim he was willing to make was that it needed a closer look down the line, the kind of careful, hedge nothing you can't back up language you'd expect from someone with his track record. Added up, an inconclusive ruling, a hole in the evidence nobody's explained, and a mark that's still a mystery. None of that closes this case. If anything, it just proved how much is still unknown. There's one detail from that morning that still hasn't added up for a lot of people following this case, and it's worth slowing down on. When the group got back from the island, Nolan wasn't with them, and his phone hadn't made the trip either. The story afterward was that he wanted more time on the island and planned to get back to the mainland on his own. But if that's really the whole story, why walk off without the one thing that could have gotten him found fast if he'd needed it? Small thing to notice, maybe. But in a case like this, it's usually the small things that end up mattering most. Christine wanted those questions actually looked into before anyone closed the book on what happened to her son. What she got instead felt like the opposite. An explanation that seemed already finished, handed to her before she'd even had a chance to grieve, never mind plan a funeral. Weeks later, in a public statement, Christine put it plainly, "Treat this case the way you would treat it if it were your own child." She wasn't asking for anything more than for her son's case to be taken as seriously as anyone else's would be. It says something that a mother had to make that appeal publicly at all, had to keep asking more than once, just to get real attention on her son's case. That's a big reason this story reached people well outside Mississippi. The NAACP stepped in too. At their national convention, President Derrick Johnson took the stage with Nolan's family standing next to him and spoke directly to the case. He laid out a pattern the organization says it keeps running into. Investigations into young black lives, he argued, tend to get closed out fast, often before anyone's finished questioning every witness or working every angle. By his count, Nolan makes 3 in the last few months. Young black men who died while out with mostly white friend groups, each time with an initial explanation that didn't survive real scrutiny. Worth being clear, that's Johnson's characterization, not an independently confirmed fact. But it's part of why this story reached people far outside Nolan's hometown. They're asking a bigger question too. Why the first version of a story so often lands before the investigation meant to actually test it. Ben Crump, the family's attorney, keeps drawing a specific line in public. This isn't about deciding who's at fault before the facts are in. What Christine and Elmore actually want is more basic than that. Treat every witness the same, regardless of who they know. Chase down every piece of evidence, no matter how minor it looks. And don't call anything final until the evidence is actually there to prove it. Nothing more dramatic than that. Just an actual, complete answer, instead of whatever's fastest to hand the cameras. There's a lot more still coming on this one. Let's be honest about where this stands. Even with everything covered so far, there are still real holes in this case. 3 of them, to be exact. Start with toxicology. Still nothing public on that front, whether we're talking about the family's own testing or Mississippi's. That gap matters. Toxicology is usually the thing that either clears a theory completely or backs up exactly what a family has been dreading since day one. Without it, a whole layer of this case just stays frozen. For now, that report is sitting with a handful of investigators and nobody else. And until that changes, this whole case is stuck in place, whatever else happens to surface along the way. Second gap, what the state itself found. Mississippi's medical examiner had first access to Nolan, days before his family arranged that outside review, meaning theirs is the exam that happened soonest after whatever actually took place, and none of it has ever come out. No report, no statement. Silence. For a family already living through this kind of scrutiny, that silence is its own kind of painful. Somewhere in that unreleased file might be exactly the answers Dr. Mitchell's exam couldn't provide. Third, and this is the big one, what shape was Nolan in right before he ended up in the water? Did he even know what was happening? Investigators have hinted in pretty careful language that this one detail could end up mattering more than any single physical finding in the whole case, because basically everything else traces back to it. Nobody has that answer tonight. Not Nolan's family, not the pathologist who examined him, not anyone else following this story. 3 gaps, 3 open questions, one case that still isn't finished. So, after all that, where does this actually leave things? Pretty much where it started. Cause and manner of death, still officially undetermined. That's not for lack of effort, and it's not because investigators stopped asking the hard questions. It's because the pieces still on the table don't add up to a full picture yet. Nolan's story is far from over. If we're being honest, tonight probably only gets us halfway through it. This case has shown one thing pretty clearly. Real answers don't land all in one shot. They trickle out, and usually only because people keep pushing and refuse to let the story quietly disappear. And every one of those open questions has real people trapped inside it. Nolan's family, who don't get a break from any of this. Christine gets up every morning with the same question she's had since this started, still unanswered. Elmore's grief mostly stays private. The world only sees flashes of it at press conferences. But it doesn't lift just because the cameras aren't rolling. And Nolan, 18 years old, doesn't get to narrate any of this. Everyone else is telling his story because he's the one person who can't. This is bigger than another headline or another update cycle. This was never really about a single afternoon back in July. It's about whether Nolan's parents finally get real answers or whether they're left hanging in the same limbo they've been stuck in since that word, undetermined, first showed up. We're not going anywhere on this story. Once toxicology comes out, we'll break it down the same way we've handled everything else here. No speculation, no getting ahead of the facts, just what's actually been confirmed. If you want that update straight from us instead of some watered-down version somewhere else, hit subscribe before you close this out. One more thing before you head out. Which part of this case actually got to you the most? Maybe it's the gap in evidence Mitchell caught right off the bat. Maybe it's how the timeline on the island played out. Or maybe it's something Christine said herself. Drop your answer in the comments. We go through everyone, and honestly, they end up steering a good chunk of what we cover next. Until there's a confirmed update, we're signing off.
Preliminary findings. And this is significant. Focal area of red discoloration in the soft tissue of the back of the head, the occipital region. He said the etiology is unknown at this time. He said the body was received after the initial autopsy. He said the body had marked decompensation. He said corona incision of the scalp, brain removal, Y-shaped incision of the anterior torso, and he talked about the organs being removed, as is common, accompanied in the body cavity. And that when you have an autopsy, the organs are removed from the body and they are dissected and examined, and then they are put back in a bag within inside the body. So when they're buried, their remains will all be with them. But in this occasion, if there's going to be a second autopsy, then the organs are put in the body cavity so the second pathologist could be able to examine the organs as well. Very significant for Dr. Mitchell was that the anterior inner neck structures were absent, not received with the body. And we'll explain that in just a minute. And then it talks about the additional procedures performed during the second autopsy. And we'll go into the paragraphs on that there because he explains it better in his narrative. So where's the first page of the discussion? Not the diagram yet. You can keep the diagram over there. Move this back, Lisa. So he talks in the preliminary discussion opinion. This forensic pathologist identified several limitations during the second autopsy that create barriers to establishing a definitive cause and manner of death for Nolan Xavier Wells. And that's important. He talks about the fact that we didn't get to see the body when it was first recovered, like the medical examiner working for Mississippi would have seen it. He talked about the second autopsy performed on Nolan Wells revealed marked decompensation or changes. Marked decompensation can obscure the presence and absence of bruising on the skin surface, especially during a second autopsy examination. What he's saying, because the body was so decomposed that you couldn't tell if there was bruises or abrasions on the body when he received it on the 10th of July. For these reasons, additional dissection procedures not performed during the first autopsy examination were performed to rule out potential blunt force injuries responsible for the death. These procedures included facial dissection, posterior head and neck dissection, dissection of the ribs, the pelvic, dissection of the subcutaneous and deep soft tissue, dissection of the back, the buttocks, the arms, and legs. He did all of this to rule out things. He ruled out there were no fractures or deep tissue injuries identified. This was very important because he wanted to be very thorough and very transparent, because transparency is the key to getting to the answers of why Nolan Wells is not with us. So he did that there and was very straightforward, very open, very open. He says, however, dissection of the back of the head during the layered posterior neck dissection revealed a 12 by 8 inch focal area of red discoloration in the deep soft tissues overlaying the occipital bone. And he talked about how he found red discoloration when he cut open into the back of his head towards the occipital bone, and he saw the red discoloration, and we actually saw the pictures of it. It's significant. You can't help but notice, why is this dark red here in the back of his head? And so he was important to note that in his report. He said that etiology of this finding is unclear. There are no lacerations of the overlaying skin nor fractures of the underlying skull. These findings are inconclusive for perimortem injury due to both the extensive decomposition and the absence of associated injuries. This finding, however, is significant enough to be highlighted in this preliminary report for further investigation. It is important to reiterate that the finding could not have been observed in the first autopsy because the posterior head and neck dissection were not performed. He said another limitation, move this back here. Another limitation faced by this forensic pathologist was the absence of the anterior internal neck structures. The trachea and the laryngeal cartilage, the thyroid horn, and the hyoid bone were not received with the body. So he's saying that the throat was not received with the body when he got Nolan Wells' body in Washington, D.C. to perform the second autopsy. And so let's discuss that with what he said about that. He said, it is assumed that the initial pathologist retained these structures for additional evaluation. He said the retention of the anterior neck structures during an initial autopsy is a common forensic pathology practice. He was chief medical examiner for 7 years in Washington, D.C., and he said that if they had concern about throat or any fracture or compression of the throat, they too will hold them back. He doesn't know why they held the throat back, but he said the throat was not with the body of Nolan Wells when he received it in Washington, D.C. to perform the second autopsy. He said, nevertheless, a posterior neck dissection performed without review of the anterior neck structures is incomplete. Therefore, this pathologist cannot rule out injury to the neck as a contributor or a cause of death. He said he would need to have the medical examiner in Mississippi allow him to review the throat. That's why he said his autopsy is undetermined pending investigation. Remember, it's about transparency. Because the initial autopsy rightfully removed and dissected each organ, there are additional limitations inherent in the second autopsy of Nolan Wells. The most significant of the limitations was the inability to directly observe the airway and the lungs for water and directly observe the stomach for gastric contents. He said it is very significant as to what the initial forensic scientists who got to review the body when it was recovered. We have heard from our call center people saying the body wasn't waterlogged. Well, we need to know those things. But unfortunately, because the body was decomposed and the organs have already been dissected, those are things we can only get from the initial autopsy. So therefore, again, the manner and cause of death is undetermined until further investigation. We are hopeful that the Mississippi medical examiner would give Dr. Mitchell an opportunity to see their photographs and their observations to the condition of Nolan Wells' body closer in time to July 4th. That is very important, and we have to continue to demand transparency, President Johnson. In addition, the original toxicology results have not been received at the time of this report. And we continue to wait for the toxicology to come back, because again, that will be part of the investigation into Nolan Wells' autopsy by Dr. Mitchell. It is significant to note that it's many things that go into toxicology that only Dr. Mitchell would be able to opine upon, and medical experts can opine upon. And he feels the proper place to do that is before a grand jury in a courtroom. And so we would hope that the district attorney would present Dr. Mitchell before the grand jury as well. We want all relevant information to be heard by the grand jury. Lastly, in cases where a death has occurred in or around a body of water, this is important. Lastly, in cases where a death has occurred in or around a body of water with suspicion of drowning, it is important to confirm how that person entered the water. This is the crux of the matter. This information is especially important for those deaths of persons who can swim. As in the case with Nolan Wells, at the time of this report, this forensic pathologist does not know the condition of Nolan Wells. He did not know whether he was conscious or unconscious when he entered the water. He said that would be significant. He said he did not know whether he was forced into the water or unforced into the water. He said that would be significant. So he said the condition of Nolan Wells before he entered the water would be the crux of the matter. It would be of utmost importance to being able to determine a cause and manner of death. He said definitive circumstances of death are required to determine the manner of death. For these reasons, this pathologist cannot rule out, and let me really call your attention to this. For these reasons, this pathologist cannot rule out if any intervening non-accidental factors contributed to or caused the death of Nolan Wells. Understand, he's saying based on the examination of the body, he cannot rule out foul play. That is significant. With the following questions still outstanding, number one, what were the circumstances that led to Nolan Xavier Wells entering the water? Number two, what was the body position when it was found? We know that a member of the United Cajun Navy said that he was face down and he was fully clothed. Number three, was there water in the airway? Remember, he talked about the lungs and the airways, where they fill with water. Number four, is there any evidence of injuries to the anterior neck structure? We got the autopsy without his neck. We got the body without his neck at the time of the second autopsy. Number five, is there any evidence of any intracranial hemorrhaging? He said that is going to be very significant. Things that he could not observe at autopsy that the initial medical examiner would have been able to observe. Number 6 was the composition of what was the composition of the stomach contents. He talks about that being important because when was he found? How long had he been in the water? How long had it been since his last meal? All those things become relevant factors when you're trying to do a thorough and impartial autopsy. And number 7, what are the toxicology report findings? He said the best classification again for the cause and manner of death for Nolan Xavier Wells is undetermined pending investigation. This forensic pathologist reserves the right to review and incorporate additional forensic pathology information into his opinion as it becomes available. He says the above opinions are expressed to a reasonable degree of medical certainty. Dr. Roger A. Mitchell, July 19, 2026. And we know that, as I said, this is only another part of the puzzle. And even though it tells us significant information, we still have more questions than we have answers at this time. And we will continue to press forward and persist, Christine and Elmore, with getting the answers to these questions.